Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1: A Summer's Unease. The heat arrived before the train, rolling over the hedgerows in shimmering sheets and laying a varnish upon every surface of Belham Green. It pressed upon window panes, turned the lane dust to powder, and made the small station's clock look drowsy and uncertain of its duties. When Hercule Poirot stepped down from the carriage, immaculate in a pale suit and a hat at precisely the angle of perfection, the hot air greeted him like a damp cloth. He paused, patted a speck of soot from his sleeve with fastidious care, and allowed himself a small sigh. "Mon ami," he murmured to the porter, who had bounced forward with rustic alacrity, "I am transported, I think, not to England but to a Turkish bath." "Odd time for a heatwave, sir," said the porter cheerfully. "You'll be for the village square, I reckon." "Everyone else is." Poirot inclined his head. "Alas, yes. I am come not for the weather." A waiting constable, young, pink-faced, and already mopped about the brow, introduced himself as Constable Finch. He looked both proud and anxious to be escorting a famous detective. "Inspector Reeve sent word, sir. Unusual circumstances. Shocked us all." "In unusual circumstances," said Poirot, settling his tie, "one must be most usual in one's methods. Precision, always." They walked slowly up the lane, for Poirot disliked to hurry, and he disliked to perspire even more. The village lay ahead, white and sleepy and faithful to a postcard, low cottages clustered about a green, a small church tilting up its steeple as though to peer over the hedges, and in whose sign, the Admiral's Arms, hung limp in the heat. At the centre of it all loomed the tree, vast and extravagant, a great banyan whose canopy threw a decisive shadow upon the grass. "Not many places in England can boast of that," Poirot observed, with a raised eyebrow. "Brought back by Admiral Ashcombe, sir," Finch said. "A seedling from the Indies, so the story goes. Took like a king. Widow Ashcombe has the cottage yonder, the one with the green shutters." "Taints," said Poirot softly, casting a glance at the windows with their neat white curtains. He noted a flutter there, no more than a twitch of fabric succumbing to a breeze that did not exist. "And she has the front row seat, Amidst par." They reached the green, and Poirot removed his gloves to keep from spotting them with dust. A cluster of villagers had gathered at a respectful distance, speaking in low voices that swelled and dwindled like the hum of bees. The bees themselves were present, curious and importunate, circling a dark patch upon the grass where something sweet had soaked into the earth. The body lay beneath the banyan's broad arms. The man was in his middle years, narrow-shouldered and lightly built, with hair that might once have been fair. His face, however, had a queer settled look that denied all colour. Close by his right hand, a stoneware jug lay on its side, its mouth damp and fringed with a rim of mud. A thin trail of liquid glistened, paused, and disappeared into the thirsty ground. A bitten wasp drifted, lazy and intoxicated. "The jug," said Finch. "Mead from the inn. We thought, well, heat and drink, sir. But then the doctor said he wasn't satisfied." Poirot, very carefully and without stepping upon the irregular oval of trampled grass, examined the scene. The banyan's leaves made a patchwork of sun and shade upon the body, a dapple that seemed indecently cheerful. He placed a silk handkerchief beneath one knee before kneeling, order and method even in discomfort, and looked closely at the dead man's throat. There, just above the collarbone, a faint bruising bloomed, not dramatic, but precise, a crescent that might be the memory of a thumb. Poirot's eyes, which could be very cold when engaged upon their chosen business, widened a degree. "Dr. Whitfield noticed that too," Finch said, eager. "Could be he fell awkward, after a fainting fit." "Could be," Poirot agreed mildly. "And yet, He raised a finger. "Observe, if you please, the jug." Finch stared obediently. "From the Admiral's arms, as I said." "It lies," said Poirot, in a most convenient attitude. "When one drops a thing suddenly, it does not always choose the picturesque." He pointed delicately. The jug lay with its handle uppermost, its base aligned almost neatly with the dead man's shoulder. Beneath its lip, the grass was not crushed but gently parted. To one side, a glass, plain, stout, of the kind rude to everything but a brick floor, stood upright, dribbling only the faintest of drops upon the roots. Finch frowned. "I don't follow, sir." "It is nothing," said Poirot. "A little arrangement only." He looked past the jug and the glass to the grass itself. Footmarks were scarce. Someone had been thoughtful with a cordon, but the patterns of flattening told their tale. A pair of small soles had paused upon the far edge of the shade, heels set close. A heavier tread had approached from the inn's direction and retreated again. Patches of the lawn were pressed in small, neat arcs, as if a person had stood and rocked gently upon their feet while they waited. Poirot did not smile, he did not frown, he simply filed these impressions in that inner cabinet wherein he kept such things until they were needed. "Monsieur," he addressed the dead with a quiet courtesy, "you have the air of one arranged for the camera. That is rarely the work of death." From the inn doorway, a man with a ledger tucked under his arm peered out, a florid fellow with forearms like hams, whose signboard hinted he was Mr. Pargeter, landlord. At the corner of the green, a girl passed swiftly with her head down, dark hair escaping order. She carried a bundle wrapped in sacking, and her pace quickened when she saw the policeman's eye. Across from her, a young man in shirt sleeves leaned upon a bicycle, his jaw set, his gaze hot with accusation at some person unspecified. Windows creaked, whispers multiplied, the church clock, unable to restrain itself, clanged the quarter hour as if the sound might cool the air. "Who is the deceased?" Poirot asked, still looking at the grass. "Name of Thomas Weaver," Finch said. "Travelling chapter, sells small goods and odds and ends. Known about. Some say reliable, some say otherwise." "Reliable is a word," said Poirot, "that enjoys too much employment." He pointed with his chin towards the cottage with the green shutters. "Madam Ashcombe already gave her statement, sir. Says she didn't hear a thing last night. Slept through with the window closed, on account of the insects. Mais naturellement." Poirot straightened, used his handkerchief to polish his cufflink, then tucked it away. He looked up. The banyan spread above them like a roof, both benevolent and theatrical, its prop roots knotting the earth into curious ridges. On one such ridge, near the dead man's left heel, a faint graze marked the bark, fresh and pale. Poirot touched it lightly. The sap was tacky. "Insects," he echoed absently. A wasp stitched a figure 8 about his ear. He did not flinch. Inspector Reeves arrived with a rush and an apology, a big man who had the air of one who preferred problems that allowed for handcuffs sooner than notebooks. "Monsieur Poirot. Grateful you could come, sir. Ghastly business. Doctor's with a patient round the lane, sunstroke, says he'll join us. Your first view, then?" "My first," Poirot said. "I prefer the first view. It is like a room before the guests arrive. One sees where the chairs were intended to be, rather than where they have been dragged." Reeves gave a good-natured puzzled laugh. "We thought heat and drink, at first. Then Finch here pointed out the mark on the neck. And the jug, well. The jug is artistic," said Poirot. "An art, Inspector, is never accidental." He pointed out softly the mischief embroidery of the scene, the jug upright enough to be theatrical though fallen, the glass barely spilled, the smear of sticky mead inconveniently placed to attract conversation and bees. Reeves squinted. "You think someone staged it?" "I do not think, I observe." "Then, perhaps, I permit myself to think of very little. Poirot's gaze toured the watching faces. Some stared with helpless fascination, some avoided the body's rude eloquence with stubborn eyes. He noted the man with the bicycle, jaw grinding like a millstone. He noted the girl with a bundle vanishing around the churchyard gate. He noted, in the window of the green-shuttered cottage, a curtain breathing as if anxious. He made, in his notebook, 3 small ticks and a question mark. Then, because he was punctilious, he added a dot after the question mark. The dot mattered to him. Was the deceased known to drink mead? Poirot asked. Hard to say, Reeves replied. He'd a taste for anything that could be charged by the pint. And did he pay? The inspector's eyebrows spoke volumes. Not without encouragement. Poirot considered the jug again. Its handle was worn smooth in the place where a right thumb would sit. Yet the smear upon its side, the one that caught the light when the wasp passed, was nearer the base, a double crescent, as though a cautious person had placed it down with 2 fingers, guiding its fall. That person, Poirot guessed, had been tidy enough to prefer a canvas with clear lines. Mr. Pargeter, Reeves called, beckoning the landlord over. Who took the mead out? Evening, lad, Pargeter said, nodding towards the inn-yard where a lanky apprentice hovered. Said the gentleman asked for it after closing. I didn't see him myself. Was in the back doing accounts. Poirot looked past Pargeter to the shadowed coolness of the inn. The apprentice had red ears and a guilty posture. After closing, Poirot repeated. One makes exceptions in heat, I suppose. In heat one does many things one would not do in the snow, Pargeter said, a trifle defensive. Poirot turned to Reeves. It would oblige me greatly, Inspector, if the boundary around our friend here were held so. No trampling, if you please. The grass, it remembers the guests even after they go home. Reeves nodded and set Finch to bustling. Poirot, satisfied, removed a speck from the brim of his hat, then replaced it. There is also this, he said, almost as an afterthought, pointing to the dead man's shoes. The right was scuffed at the toe, the left polished to a shine. An untidy man would scuff both, a tidy man would scuff neither. To scuff one is interesting. Reeves stared, baffled but trusting. Meaning? Meaning, Poirot said gently, that we are not in the presence of sunstroke, nor of that respectable English institution, the unfortunate accident. We are in the presence of someone's intention. He looked once more at the tranquil, hateful jug, at the neat, stagey glass, at the bruise that would not be an accident no matter how one squinted at it. Then he looked up at the banyan, at its old adventurous branches that had crossed seas to tower over an English green, and he said in a voice that carried to the furthest cottage window. This, Inspector, is murder. Chapter 2, The Village Whispers. News travels faster than sense in a village, and by the time Inspector Reeves and Hercule Poirot began their round of calls, Belham Green had already tried the case and produced 3 different murderers. The heat thickened the gossip. It seemed to rise with the steam from bakery ovens and to cling, sweet and stale, to the thatch. Poirot preferred facts to flavours. He proposed the simplest tour, the nearest witness first. Mrs. Martha Ashcombe received them in a parlour where everything strained to be respectable. Lace doilies controlled the tabletops, a clock the size of a small melon ticked as if conscious of duty, and in the air there was the thin, determined perfume of lavender. The shutters were half closed, though the day begged for any scrap of breeze. You will forgive the intrusion, madam, Poirot said with a small bow. You have, alas, the misfortune to overlook the scene. I saw nothing, the widow answered quickly. She was small-boned, neatly dressed, and wore her grief like an apron, practical and always to hand. Not till this morning, when I drew back the shutter and there he was like something left by the tide. You slept with the window closed, Inspector Reeves prompted, consulting his notebook. Indeed I did. The insects. Mrs. Ashcombe shivered delicately, as though the very word had legs. Poirot's gaze wandered, apparently aimless. On the sill a faint, fresh smear of polish gleamed where a cloth had passed. On the sewing table by the window a pincushion sprouted needles like a hedgehog that had given up. Beside it, coils of neatly wound cord in different gauges lay in a wooden tray, clothesline, parcel twine, a thicker length used for garden work. He tapped the tray with a fingertip. "You are industrious." "With things as they are, one must be," she said. "Admiral Ashcombe, my late husband's uncle, left a little, but not enough to keep a house. I make do, string and mending for the shopkeepers, nets for the vicarage gooseberries, that sort." Reeves, who would not willingly see a clue if it wore bells and danced, grunted politely and asked about the previous evening. Mrs. Ashcombe's account was smooth: early supper, some mending, the wireless, bed at 10, no visitors, a poor night due to the heat, no noises, save the church clock striking as usual. Poirot, softly, "As usual?" "You heard it, madam, with the window closed." She coloured. "I suppose one hears what one expects to hear." "Just so," Poirot said, and smiled in a way that comforted and recorded both. On their way out, Poirot paused by the back door. A coil of thicker rope hung from a peg. Its cat end was clean and new, the strands not yet smudged by a garden's work. He did not touch it. He only looked until he had memorized the twist of the ply. They crossed to the Admiral's Arms. The inn's cool gloom was a mercy after the glare, and carried the honest perfume of yeast and old wood. Mr. Pargeter, landlord, greeted them with respectful unease. "Terrible business, gentlemen. I pride myself this is a clean house. Nothing like this in living memory. The mead," Inspector Reeves said, "came from you." "That it did, sir, at a late hour. Not our custom, but," he spread his hands and the heat explained the rest. Ned took it across. Ned was produced, a long boy with the posture of someone who has grown quickly and uncertainly. His ears were an eloquent crimson. "You carried a jug and a glass," Poirot said, kindly. "At what time?" "Must have been near 11:30, sir." Mr. Weaver asked nice. "Said he'd pay." "I'm not to serve after they're called, but Mr. Pargeter said I might, being a hot night." "He paid?" Reeves asked. "A tanner and some odd coppers," Ned said. "I give him change back in the lane." "You went on the grass?" Poirot inquired. "No, sir. Not past the edge." "The dew makes your shoes squeak later," Ned added, with village wisdom. Poirot's head tilted. "Dew, in such heat?" "But yes, even in a heatwave a breath of night can add a skin to the grass under a banyan's generous shade." "And Mr. Weaver, how was he?" "Cheery," Ned said, promptly. "Said he was waiting on a friend." "A friend," Poirot repeated, lightly. "Did he name them?" "No, sir." Ned's eyes flicked, involuntarily, towards the forge at the far end of the square. "Only said, they know where to find me." Mr. Pargeter grew pink in turn. "There's talk," he muttered. "I don't give credence, but talk there is." Poirot did not press him. He thanked them both and stood a moment at the doorway, letting his eyes grow accustomed to the light. On the step, impressed faintly in the softened pitch that sealed a crack in the threshold, was the clear print of a small heel. A woman's shoe, narrow, with a penny-sized notch cut from the outside edge, perhaps to relieve a blister. Not so very uncommon, and yet when one has begun to assemble a pattern one notices the threads that match. The forge hammered the afternoon like a metronome. Mr. Josiah Bell, the blacksmith, worked bare-armed, his muscles turning and polishing themselves with each blow. Sparks flew and died like moths. In a corner, seated upon an upturned crate, was Clara Bell, his daughter, a slight girl with dark hair and the anxious stillness of someone at bay. The bundle Poirot had noticed earlier lay at her feet, now unwrapped to reveal a length of ribbon, a paper of pins, and, oddly for a forge, a tiny bottle of scent. Reeves planted himself solidly. "You were seen speaking with Thomas Weaver late last night." Clara's hands tightened on the ribbon. He asked me to meet him. Only to talk." "To talk of what?" Poirot asked, and made it gentle. She glanced at her father, then back. "Of a brooch he sold me for a friend. He said it was silver and it isn't. I wanted my money back. He said I'd have to ask the person who put him up to it. I don't know what he meant." Her voice thinned. "He was nasty, monsieur. Not loud, but nasty. Said I should be careful not to fall out with people who could make trouble for me." The blacksmith's hammer landed with a murderous thud. "And there'll be no more talk with him." Poirot watched the father without seeming to anger honest enough, but the kind that sometimes does foolishness to prove it is strong. "At what hour was this conversation, mademoiselle?" "Near midnight, I think," she said. "By the time I came out the clock was striking. I didn't stay. George Holt, rode by and saw me. I was ashamed to be seen with Mr. Weaver." She turned scarlet. "George Holt, the labourer?" Reeves prompted. "Yes," she said, barely audible. Mr. Bell blew air through his nose like a bellows. "Young Holt's a fool when he's roused, and roused he was. If there's harm done, he'd have more cause than anyone." Poirot's gaze lowered to Clara's shoes. Narrow, worn at the outside edge, with a small home-cut notch in the right sole. He said nothing. He had no need to. George Holt was found at the back of his mother's cottage, mending a chain with more energy than hope. He was the young man with the bicycle. There it stood, leaning against the wall, its tire dusty with a chalky bloom from the lane. He had a face that would have been handsome if the eyes had been less quick to burn. "You saw Miss Bell at the Green last night," Reeves began. "I saw her," he said shortly. "Talking to that peddler rat. She cried when she saw me, so I told her to go home and keep her tears for someone who deserved them." "You and Mr. Weaver quarrelled?" Poirot asked, mildly. George's jaw twitched. "He had a knife of mine. I'd lost it at the fair, and he said he'd got it honest. I told him he'd get it honest out of his hide if he didn't hand it over. That's all." "And did he?" "No, he looked away. Said he had use for a knife that night. I told him he'd best choose use or his teeth, but he laughed." Poirot regarded him with a new interest. "And after that?" "I went home. Ask my mother. The clock struck 12 as I turned into the yard." "Ah," Poirot said. "The clock is a good citizen. It speaks for many people." On the way back across the green, the vicar intercepted them by the Lych gate, all concern and clean collars. "Inspector!" "Monsieur Poirot." "We are praying, of course. Anything the church may supply, tea, chairs, comfort." "Information," said Poirot, smiling. "I admire your bell rope." The vicar followed his glance. The rope, pale and newly brushed, hung fresh as bread. "Oh, that!" Mrs. Ashcombe persuaded the bell-ringers to replace the frayed length only yesterday afternoon. "She is a marvel, organizes everything." "Yesterday," Poirot repeated. "And the old rope?" "In the shed for the harvest festival, flags and so on," the vicar said. "We never throw away something that may yet serve." Reeves thanked him and pulled Poirot on. "You think a bell rope?" "I think nothing," Poirot said serenely. "I note that witches." But he filed the sequence in that orderly cabinet: "New rope put up, old rope put by, a man found this morning with a crescent upon his throat and a scene arranged as for applause." They stopped at the post office for a word with Mrs. Peebles, whose shop sold everything but discretion. She had seen Mr. Weaver in the afternoon, she said, arguing over postage with a red-haired man from the quarry. She had also seen Mrs. Ashcombe buy lavender polish and request a longer length of garden cord than usual. In the same breath she lamented the decline of manners and the price of butter. Poirot, whose ear could separate treble from bass, collected what he wanted and left the rest humming to itself. As they reached the square, Dr. Whitfield trotted up, pinching his collar loose. Apologies, old Mr. Bligh fell faint among his beans. Heat's wicked. Now then, our man under the tree. He lowered his voice. I don't like the neck, Inspector. Not strangulation in the classic manner, too clean, but pressure. A cord or ligature applied briefly and decisively. No great struggle. That, in itself, is curious. Curious? Reeves echoed. Most men resist, the doctor said. Yet this one shows little sign of it. Either he trusted the person who laid hands on him, or he was surprised, or drunk, or otherwise induced to stillness. Poirot nodded as if to himself. Induced to stillness, he repeated. Yes. That is a thought which has the neatness. They stood once more beneath the banyan shadow, lighter now, as afternoon stretched, and the square stirred cautiously back into its routine. A child tugged at a hoop, somewhere a radio murmured dance music, bees returned to their honest argument with Clover. Yet under it all, Poirot felt the strain of a violin string drawn close to breaking, the village waiting to be told a story it could bear. Reeves rubbed his face. Well, monsieur, we've a jealous youth, a nervous girl, a landlord who bends rules, and a widow who keeps the village tidy. Add a peddler with more enemies than friends. It's a marketplace of motives. Poirot's eyes shone. You see, Inspector? Already we are rich. But wealth must be sorted, OUI? The coins of truth from the paper of rumour. He glanced once again at the tidy jug, the glass, the grass that remembered the feet that had visited and gone. Now we will do what the little grey cells like best. We will talk, quietly, one by one, and we will listen to the things that do not fit. And if none of it fits? Poirot adjusted his hat, immaculate even now. Then we have chosen the wrong puzzle. But I do not think so. He tapped the notebook in his breast pocket, the one with 3 small ticks and a question mark, punctuated. Somewhere, Miss Amis, there is a stitch that shows itself. Ah, and I am told Mrs. Ashcombe makes nets. I am fond of a net when I am the one holding it. He set off across the green with that precise, unhurried step that made fuss look vulgar. Behind him the village whispers lifted again, as if his passing had stirred them, names, hours, debts, the chime of midnight, a girl's ribbon, a bell rope, a jug placed just so. And above them all, the banyan kept its counsel, sun-trapped in its leaves, roots sunk deep into foreign soil that had decided to call itself home. Chapter 3, or the Widow's Unease. The afternoon light slanted across Belham Green with the same oppressive weight as the morning, but Hercule Poirot, though fastidious about heat, showed no sign of complaint. He walked with Inspector Reeves to the green-shuttered cottage that faced the banyan tree. The curtains were now drawn back, letting the glow of day fall into a room that looked altogether too neat for a house in mourning of recent violence. Mrs. Martha Ashcombe answered their knock swiftly, as though she had been waiting just beyond the door. She wore a dark dress despite the heat, with sleeves buttoned to the wrist and a brooch fastened high at her throat. Her hands, delicate but not idle, fiddled ceaselessly with a linen handkerchief. "Gentlemen," she said, with a small curtsy of respect. "If it is more questions you must ask, I will answer as I am able." Poirot stepped inside, removing his hat. He let his gaze wander in the delicate, bird-like way of his manner, touching each object in the room with a brief but exact glance. He noted the tidy row of framed photographs upon the mantel, severe gentlemen in naval uniform, ladies with parasols, and a small glass case that contained medals polished so brightly they seemed to glow. "It is most obliging of you, madam," Poirot said with his courteous bow. "Already you have assisted us with your statement. Yet it is the small details that matter, you understand? It is often the detail which to others seems of no consequence that tells the story entire." Mrs. Ashcombe gave a strained smile. "I have little to tell. I sleep early. I hear little. If this Weaver man had misfortune, it came not through me." Inspector Reeves cleared his throat. "But you saw the body first, this morning?" "Indeed. I opened my shutter for air, and there he was. A frightful sight. Her fingers knotted the handkerchief until it looked like rope. I called at once for Mr. Pargeter. He went for the constable." Poirot advanced to the window, inspecting the view. From here, the banyan tree loomed with theatrical majesty. Its roots twisted in odd knots, its leaves shivered faintly though the air was still. The body would have been visible precisely from this vantage, framed as if for a tableau. "And yet, madam," Poirot said softly, "your window was closed through the night." "Yes." Poirot turned his head, his eyes narrowing just a fraction. "Then you could not have heard the voices, the steps, the sound of quarrel." "I heard nothing." "And yet, this morning, you said you were disturbed in the night." She blinked. "Did I?" "You spoke of the clock striking," Poirot said gently. "It is curious, is it not, to hear one thing and not another?" The widow flushed faintly, colour rising to her pale cheeks. "Perhaps I dreamed it. An old woman dreams many things." Poirot inclined his head, as though granting the point. But the little grey cells within his head registered the hesitation, the small contradiction, the discomfort too sharp to be dismissed as frailty. He let Reeves blunder on with questions about the brooch Weaver had sold her, a trinket she had complained of being false silver. She admitted she had demanded her money back, but claimed Weaver laughed and walked away. "I have no patience for cheats," she said. "But I would not kill for a brooch, sir. Do you think me a monster?" Poirot spread his hands. "It is not for me to think such things, madam. I observe only. But consider, Weaver was not much loved. He sold false goods, demanded interest from poor men, entangled himself in matters not his own. It gives one, alas, a wide field of suspects." Her eyes flicked nervously to the window, to the banyan tree standing sentinel. Poirot saw her throat move as she swallowed, the handkerchief twisting tighter in her hand. "Do you fear something, madam?" Poirot asked softly. She drew herself up at once. "Fear? I? Certainly not. Only this is a quiet village. We do not have such matters here. To find a body beneath one's very window, it unsettles the spirit." Poirot bowed once more, letting the matter drop. But as they took their leave, he lingered in the doorway. His sharp eyes caught sight of the shed at the side of the cottage, its door stood ajar. Within, he glimpsed coils of rope hung neatly on pegs, each labelled with its purpose: washing, parcels, gardening. One hook was empty, its tag reading spare length. He said nothing to the widow. He simply touched his hat in farewell and stepped into the glare of the square. Back on the green, Reeves mopped his forehead. "I'll say it straight, Poirot. She's hiding something. All that talk of dreams and insects, she's too flustered for innocence." Poirot smiled faintly. "Flustered, yes. But guilty? That is another matter. You see, Inspector, guilt has a rhythm. It makes the liar too careful, the innocent too careless. Madame Ashcombe trembles, but she does not yet sing the song of murder." Reeves frowned. "Then what do you call it?" Unease, Poirot said. The unease of one who knows more than she tells, but is not certain whether to reveal it. He tapped the side of his head. We shall wait. The mind that hides is like the kettle on the hob, it must whistle in the end. Poirot did not return immediately to the inn. Instead, he chose to wander slowly about the green, as though merely admiring the architecture of the cottages. In truth, his eyes were busy. He noticed how several villagers watched from behind half-opened shutters, their faces vanishing quickly when his gaze lifted. He marked the way Clara Belle hurried past with her basket, not daring to look at the Banyan. He observed George Holt standing at the pump, his hands white upon the handle, staring moodily across at the widow's cottage. Everywhere, suspicion seeped like heat through the cracks of the village. And at the heart of it, the Banyan stood, keeping its secrets. Poirot returned at last to the inn's parlour, where Constable Finch was taking statements in clumsy longhand. The villagers queued in twos and threes, eager to speak and yet unwilling to say much of use. A quarrelsome man, that weaver, muttered Mr. Peebles from the post office. Always demanding, never paying. Sold me a box of nails that bent at the first strike. Should have been drummed out of the county. Too much to drink, I'll wager, said another. Always hanging about after hours. Poirot let them speak. Each complaint was small, petty, yet together they painted a portrait, a man resented, a man distrusted, a man who had stretched the patience of too many. When the queue thinned, Poirot asked Finch for the possessions taken from the body. A pouch of coins, tarnished and mixed with foreign currency, a cheap watch whose chain had snapped, a crumpled envelope with an unfinished letter. Poirot examined the letter again, still only the half sentence, "If you do not pay me by midnight, I shall have no choice but to." Midnight, Poirot murmured. Always midnight. The widow hears the clock, the girl leaves her meeting then, the youth returns home then, and Weaver himself writes of it. He placed the letter down with precision. The village moves by the striking of the hour. Midnight is the thread that sews them all. Reeves gave a grunt. So what now, Poirot? We've shadows, hints, and a dozen folk with reason to dislike the man. But we've nothing solid to hang a man on. Poirot lifted his chin. Then, Inspector, we must not hang a man yet. We must first untangle the knot. And for that, he gestured towards the green where the banyan shadow stretched long across the grass, we must listen not only to what is spoken, but to what is not. The inspector sighed heavily, but Poirot smiled with serene confidence. Already, in the delicate tremor of the widow's voice, in the nervous dart of her eyes, and in the empty hook in her shed, Poirot felt the outline of truth forming. It was incomplete, yes, but the pattern was there, waiting to be finished. And Hercule Poirot, who delighted in patterns more than puzzles, knew he would finish it. Reeves gave a grunt. So what now, Poirot? We've shadows, hints, and a dozen folk with reason to dislike the man. But we've nothing solid to hang a man on. Poirot lifted his chin. Then, Inspector, we must not hang a man yet. We must first untangle the knot. And for that, he gestured towards the green where the banyan shadow stretched long across the grass, we must listen not only to what is spoken, but to what is not. The inspector sighed heavily, but Poirot smiled with serene confidence. Already, in the delicate tremor of the widow's voice, in the nervous dart of her eyes, and in the empty hook in her shed, Poirot felt the outline of truth forming. It was incomplete, yes, but the pattern was there, waiting to be finished. And Hercule Poirot, who delighted in patterns more than puzzles, knew he would finish it. Chapter 4: A Secret Meeting. The Admiral's arms did its best to be cool, but the heat lay upon the floorboards like a sleeping cat that refused to be moved. Mr. Pargeter had flung the windows wide, curtains hung without stirring. A jug stood on the counter, twin to the one found beneath the banyan, and beside it a tray where the constable had set the recovered glass to dry. Nothing had been washed, by Poirot's insistence. "Allow me," Poirot said, lifting the glass with his handkerchief. He held it up to the light, turning it with slow exactness. "Observe, Inspector. Only the faintest of marks upon the rim, no lipstick, no clouding from repeated use. It is a glass that stood mostly for show." Reeves peered. "You mean he didn't drink?" "Not as much as he wished it to appear," Poirot replied. He lowered the glass and smelt the lip. "A breath of mead, yes, and," he paused. "Lavender. Very slight. One needs the nose polite, not inquisitive, to notice." "Half the village smells of lavender," Mr. Pargeter said defensively. "Mrs. Ashcombe buys the Polish by the bottle. And Miss Bell had a tiny scent bottle at the forge," Poirot added mildly. "Just so. It is a clue that points many ways, which is often what a murderer prefers." He set the glass down with care and inspected the jug. A smear near the base caught his eye, not sticky now, but dulled, as though two careful fingers had guided it to a rest. The handle's upper curve showed a thin clean streak where a cloth had perhaps wiped in haste. Poirot looked to Mr. Pargeter. "We moved nothing, sir," the landlord protested. "Only fetched the doctor and constable." "I do not accuse," Poirot said, with a little bow. "I simply make the acquaintance of our props." At his signal the lanky apprentice, Ned, was brought from the yard. Up close, the boy's blush belonged more to nerves than guilt. Poirot seated him and folded himself into a chair opposite, immaculate despite the sticky air. "Mon ami," he said, friendly and precise, "you took the mead near 11:30. You stood at the edge of the green and would not go on the dew. You gave Mr. Weaver his change, and he told you he waited for a friend." Ned nodded, half surprised to find his memory so neatly transcribed. "He did, sir." "And did he say, perhaps, when this friend would arrive?" Ned shifted. He looked up at the church, sir, and said, 'By midnight, or I go elsewhere with what I know.'" Reeves's head came up. "Elsewhere? Where?" "He didn't say. Only laughed and tapped his breast like he was minding a secret in his pocket." Ned hesitated. "I thought he was making a game. He'd had a nip already." Poirot's eyes warmed. "Thank you. One thing more, did you see anyone cross the green after you left?" Ned frowned at the ceiling, seeing again the night as a map. "A figure from the lane by the vicarage, sir. Small. Might have had a shawl. I couldn't swear it was a lady, only," he glanced towards the forge, and then at the floor. "Only it stepped light." "Light stepping is not a crime," Poirot said, and dismissed him gently. When they emerged into the afternoon glare, the church bell rope seemed to swing of its own accord in Poirot's thoughts. He led Reeves across to the Lych gate and into the cool, chalk-scented nave. The vicar, surprised but obliging, took them to the vestry and thence to a lean-to where bunting and pew dusters lived in faded peace. There, neatly coiled upon a shelf, lay the old bell rope of thick, hairy, and comfortingly honest. "You see," the vicar said, patting it as one might a retired dog, "we kept it. Never know when it might be useful." Poirot lifted a strand and ran it over his fingers. It rasped like a cat's tongue. "A rough fellow," he murmured. "He would leave his autograph upon the skin." "Is this about the mark you mentioned?" Reeves asked. "Doctor thought a cord was used." Poirot nodded. "Dr. Whitfield speaks of pressure, brief, decisive, without the scratches a rope like this would make. Something narrower. Smoother." The vicar cocked his head. "Clothesline? Sash cord?" He flushed. "Or a woman's, well, stays." "Something of that nature," Poirot said politely, already turning the puzzle in his mind. He thanked the vicar and stepped back into the sunlight, where the Banyan threw its cool island upon the green. As they crossed that shade he paused, kneeling with his folded handkerchief under one knee, and pressed a fingertip to the pale graze on the root he had noticed before. The sap had sealed now, but the mark's edges were still tender. "Dragged," Reeves suggested, looking over his shoulder. "Lowered," Poirot said. "Or steadied. Look, this scrape would match a man's heel if his foot swung while he was guided down. And our friend's right shoe is scuffed at the toe, the left kept pretty. One foot slid, the other did not. See how tidy death can be when someone likes things arranged." The inspector muttered something unprintable and wiped his forehead again. "We keep circling back to the same small company, the widow, the girl, the young fellow, the landlord. Add that red-haired quarryman Mrs. Peebles talked about, Rook." "Mr. Evan Rook," Poirot supplied. "We shall not neglect him." They found Rook beyond the last cottage, where the lane lifted toward the quarry. He had shoulders like flagstones and an expression that suggested the world had not met his expectations and ought to reconsider. He listened to their questions with the wary patience of a large animal humoring smaller ones. "I argued with Weaver," he admitted. "He'd shorted me on nails. Said I counted wrong. I told him I could count to a punch on the nose. That was afternoon. I've better ways to spend my midnights." "Where were you at midnight?" Reeves asked. "In my bed," Rook said evenly. "And my sister saw me there when the clock struck. She sleeps light." His eyes slid past them to the wide sky. "He was a maggot in the village. But I didn't step on him." Poirot thanked him and did not press. He had learnt to distinguish the resentments that make noise from the resentments that make plans. Rook's had the bluntness of daylight. The murder they were reading had been executed by someone who cherished order. At dusk, when the heat fell away by fractions and the square remembered how to breathe, Poirot returned to the forge. Clara Bell sat upon the step plaiting ribbon, her small fingers quick but not merry. Her father had gone to fetch water, the anvil slept. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, pausing before her so that she did not start, "you were very brave last night to end your conversation and go home. That is not always easy." She looked up, surprised into a ghost of a smile. "I only wanted to be done with him." "You said he spoke of trouble. Of someone who put him up to selling a false brooch." She nodded, eyes flicking to the road as if the words themselves might bring watchers. "He said I was to tell them he wanted more money. Or he'd tell what he knew. I asked who, and he told me to hold my tongue and not pretend I didn't know." "I don't know, monsieur." "Truly." Poirot sat on the lowest step, careful of his crease. "Do you remember anything small? A word, an object, a scent?" Clara hesitated. He kept touching his pocket, like Ned said. "And when I left him, I went by the tree on the far side and," she wrinkled her nose. "I smelt lavender. Not like the polish, exactly. Sweeter. It hung there, even in the heat. I thought someone had passed that way just before me." "Scent is a shy witness," Poirot said. "It speaks quickly and then runs." "And after you left?" "I hid by the forge," she confessed, eyes down. "I didn't want George to see me cry again. I heard the clock strike 12. I heard," she stopped, frowning. "Footsteps. Soft. And a voice. Low. A woman's, I think." Mr. Weaver laughed. He didn't laugh long. The ribbon in her fingers faltered and then resumed. Poirot let the silence rest between them until it was not a punishment. "You have told me something important, mademoiselle," he said at last. "It will be useful. Do not be afraid." She glanced at him with gratitude that was almost painful to see. "People think things," she whispered. "Because George is quick to anger. But he blazes and then it's gone. This was not blaze. No, Poirot agreed. This was domestic. This was done by someone who tidies. He left her and crossed the green once more, tracing the night's map with his patent leather step. Here the apprentice had paused, there the girl had fled, here the young man had ground his teeth, and here, he paused beneath the banyan, here someone had come soft-footed across the grass and persuaded a man to be still for a little while. The persuasion had been enough. When he rejoined Reeves at the inn, the inspector was bent over a list of names. "We've near the whole village saying where they were at midnight," he said, weary. "The clock is a tyrant." "And a friend," Poirot said. "It brackets our tale." He considered the glass again, its pale rim, and the jug with its careful smear. "You see, Inspector?" Mr. Weaver wanted his meeting to look like a tryst or a spree. He ordered drink as a stage prop, not a thirst. He set himself to be seen at ease beneath the tree. He waited for someone to come who would not want any scene at all. Reeves tapped his pencil. "You think he blackmailed the wrong person?" Poirot's smile was brief and not at all kind. "I think he blackmailed the right one. And I think that person was accustomed to putting things in their proper place." He rose. "Tomorrow, we will look at hands. Hands that polish, hands that tie knots, hands that guide a jug to lie beautifully upon the grass. For tonight, we have learnt our most valuable thing. And that is?" "That there was a second meeting at midnight," Poirot said softly, looking through the open door at the banyan's dark crown against a bruised sky. "A secret meeting. Not the quarrel with the girl, nor the flare with the young man, but the quiet talk with someone who did not raise their voice. In such conversations, my friend, people do not shout. They arrange." Reeves shivered, though the night was still warm. "And when do we arrest someone?" "When the picture hangs straight," Poirot said, and laid 2 fingers, very lightly, upon the rim of the waiting glass, as if to remind it of where it had been told to stand. Chapter 5, Shadows of Money. The morning after Weaver's death broke hazy and damp, though the sun soon pushed through to reclaim its throne. Hercule Poirot, who disliked extremes of weather, stepped out of the Admiral's arms as though bracing himself for battle. He brushed a minute trace of dust from his sleeve and took in the village green. The banyan tree cast its monumental shadow across the square, but the villagers moved about with cautious steps, whispering when they thought themselves unobserved. Inspector Reeves joined him with a notebook bulging in his pocket. "We're no further, Poirot. Everyone's alibis sound good enough, and half of them point to the other half. What's worse, they're beginning to resent our questions. Country folk close ranks." Poirot, polishing his moustache with a small comb, replied serenely, "That is because we have asked only for where they were. We have not asked why. It is the motive, mon cher, that makes a lie worth the effort. Without it, there is no music to their story." He drew from his pocket the half-written letter taken from Weaver's belongings. The envelope was crumpled but still legible. The words were inscribed in a hurried, almost theatrical hand. "If you do not pay me by midnight, I shall have no choice but to." Poirot tapped it with one finger. "You see here?" Weaver was not merely a victim. He was also a hunter. He wrote of money, of payment, of threats. It is this, Inspector, that we must understand. Weaver traded in small things, but here is something larger. Reeves frowned. We checked his pouch, just a handful of coins, and not even proper currency for the most part. A few foreign pieces, old as the hills. Doesn't look like the stash of a blackmailer. Poirot gave a delicate shrug. Ah, but perhaps he had just begun his collection. Or perhaps he had collected not money but promises, and promises do not jingle until one breaks them. Their first call was at the post office. Mrs. Peebles, rosy-cheeked and sharp-eyed, bustled behind the counter with more energy than the morning required. She leaned forward eagerly as they entered. "You found out who did it, I suppose?" I said to my neighbour it must be young Holt, always storming about with fists like kettle drums. Or perhaps that widow Ashcombe. Oh, she's too neat, that one. People who polish so much always have something to hide. Poirot raised a calming hand. "Madam, the truth is not in haste. Tell me instead of Mr. Weaver. Did he often send letters?" "Letters?" She sniffed. "Dozens. Always with a shifty look, asking if I'd seen who posted what. Last week he tried to send a parcel marked fragile that rattled like stones. Wouldn't pay the right fee either, said it was a gift. I told him, no charity here." "And did he ever receive letters?" Poirot asked. Mrs. Peebles pursed her lips. "From time to time. One, I recall, in an envelope lined with blue, came just a fortnight ago. He pocketed it quick enough, looking pleased with himself. I thought, that's money talk, that is. But he'd no bank account, not that sort." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, madam. You are most observant." They left her glowing with satisfaction. Reeves muttered, "So Weaver fancied himself a moneylender?" He had no standing for that. Standing, no, Poirot agreed. But opportunity, perhaps. A desperate villager, an unpaid debt, a false promise, it is a field most fertile for the weed of blackmail. At the quarry, Evan Rook's sister confirmed her brother's alibi, albeit with a scowl for the police. He was home by 11:30. I hear him cough at the window each night before bed. Our mother did it, and now he does, a habit, like. If Thomas Weaver came to harm, it wasn't my Evan's hand. Poirot thanked her and asked casually, "Did Weaver owe your family money?" Her eyes narrowed. "Oh? Ha! He never lent us a penny, but he was quick enough to take. He sold Evan a box of nails that split like reeds. Evan paid full price, then had to buy proper ones again. If anyone owed, it was him to us." Poirot absorbed this with a thoughtful hum. The picture of Weaver grew clearer, a man who thrived on petty cheats, small gains, and the slow choking grip of debt. Later, at the forge, Poirot found Josiah Bell hammering with his usual violence. Sparks jumped angrily from the iron, and the sound rang in the air like blows to a drum. Clara sat nearby, stitching at a torn apron with downcast eyes. "Monsieur Bell," Poirot began, "I will not keep you long. Only this, did Weaver owe you money?" The blacksmith barked a laugh. "Owe me?" "No, sir, but he had a hold on my daughter. That brooch, worthless tin, and still she gave her savings for it. I swore I'd thrash him, but she begged me not to shame her. So he walked free." Poirot turned to Clara, his tone gentler. "And you, mademoiselle? Did he press you for more?" She flushed. "He said if I wanted my money back, I should ask the one who told him to sell it me. I don't know who he meant, monsieur, truly. Only that he looked sly, as if he'd a secret too sharp to speak." Poirot bent his head. "Secrets, mademoiselle, are like debts. They come due. Remember this." By afternoon, the village hall was alive with murmurs. Constable Finch had gathered townsfolk to give statements, but instead they traded rumours like currency. Poirot moved among them, listening. He caught fragments. "Borrowed off me last harvest, never paid back. Had my George write his name on a paper, said it was for a delivery. Spied him counting coins behind the inn, muttering about midnight." When Reeves finally herded them out, Poirot stood very still in the empty hall. "You hear, Inspector? Weaver spread debts like the seeds of a thistle. Some small, some greater. Yet one of them, I think, was fatal. Reeves frowned. Which? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The one he wrote of here. He tapped the letter again. Someone owed him enough to kill. Someone for whom the stroke of midnight was not a figure of speech, but a deadline. That evening, Poirot and Reeves returned to Mrs. Ashcombe's cottage. The widow sat in her parlour, a sewing basket by her chair. The same coils of cord hung neatly in the shed outside, one still absent. "Madam," Poirot said, his voice very soft, "Mr. Weaver wrote a letter about money due by midnight. Did he threaten you also?" Her hands trembled. He spoke of my late husband. Said debts remained from his voyages. That if I would not pay, he would tell the parish I lived on false means. I told him it was nonsense, but he only smiled. Smiled, and said I would find him under the tree when I was ready to confess my purse. Poirot watched her closely. "And did you go?" She clutched the handkerchief to her mouth. "No. I barred my shutters and prayed he would fall asleep drunk. I could not bear to see him." Reeves leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Yet you saw him at dawn, and cried out before anyone else. Too convenient, perhaps." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "Non, Inspector." "Not yet. Madame Ashcombe may tremble, but trembling is not strangling." He turned to the window. Outside, the banyan's branches shifted in a breeze at last stirring the dusk. Poirot spoke more to himself than to them both. Debts, blackmail, the shadow of money. Weaver sowed too many threats. The question is not who disliked him, but who could not afford to let him speak again. He touched his moustache delicately, eyes alight with thought. "And, Miss Amos, I believe the answer lies not in what Weaver demanded, but in what he promised to reveal." The room fell silent, save for the slow tick of Mrs. Ashcombe's clock. The hour hand moved towards 9, yet Poirot's mind already measured midnight, where the lines of all their stories converged. Chapter 6, Red Herrings. The next day dawned hotter still, the village lying under a white sky that seemed to press its hand upon the roofs and meadows alike. Belham Green had never known such weather, nor such talk. Wherever Poirot walked, shutters stirred, doors cracked ajar, and eyes followed his steps. It was not every day that murder came to a quiet English green, nor that the famous Belgian detective with his polished shoes and extravagant moustache arrived to unravel it. Inspector Reeves, with his sleeves rolled to the elbow, met Poirot by the banyan tree. He looked weary already. "We're drowning in tales, Poirot. Everyone saw something, heard something, or says they did. And the more they talk, the less it fits." Poirot smiled, entirely untroubled by the heat. "Mais oui, Inspector, it is the way of things. A murder is like a pebble cast in a pond. It makes ripples, many ripples. Some are the truth, others only noise. The little grey cells must decide which is which." Reeves produced a pocket knife in a plastic envelope. "Found this yesterday, near the tree. Belongs to George Holt, by his own admission. Young fool says Weaver had it, and he wanted it back. But it's clean, no blood, no fibres. Just a smear of something dark. Whitfield says it's berry juice." Poirot examined the knife with delicate distaste. "And so, voila. We have a red herring. Our friend Holt quarrelled, yes, but he did not strike in this manner. He is too quick to blaze, and this crime, this was cool. Precise. A man strangled quietly, arranged as for a photograph. Young Holt would not tidy his victim so. He would leave him sprawling and call it done." Reeves grunted. "Try telling that to the villagers. Half of them say Holt's temper will hang him one day." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "But perhaps not this day." They spent the morning gathering more of these ripples. First, Mrs. Peebles of the post office insisted she had seen a shadow beneath the banyan near midnight. I was taking the cat in, and I looked across the green, she declared. I saw a figure stooping. Clear as anything, though I couldn't say who. I thought it was a lover's tryst, so I looked away. Poirot listened politely, then asked, "Did the clock strike as you watched?" "Why, yes." It had just finished. And still you could not tell if the figure was man or woman. It was too dark. Poirot bowed. Then you saw the silhouette that you expected, not the one that was there. Expectation, madam, is the enemy of accuracy. Mrs. Peebles was offended, but Poirot only smiled. At the inn, Mr. Pargeter now claimed he had heard voices in the square when he locked up. Two of them, murmuring low, he told them. A man and a woman, I'd swear. I thought nothing of it at the time. But it must have been Weaver and his murderer. Poirot lifted a brow. You locked up at what hour? 11:30. Then Weaver had not yet received his friend. He was waiting. If you heard voices, they were not his. Perhaps a couple from the cottages, perhaps a tramp passing through. It is another ripple, monsieur, nothing more. Pargeter reddened. You make it sound as though I'm inventing. Poirot bowed again, courteous but unmoved. The greatest ripple of all came from George Holt himself. In the square that afternoon, he was seen shouting at Josiah Bell, Clara's father, fists clenched. You think I killed him? George bellowed. But I'll tell you, if he'd lived another night, he'd have had worse from someone else. He had the whole village in his pocket. Poirot stepped between them with his small frame but undeniable authority. Messrs, please. A quarrel does not help us. The truth, it hides in silence, not in shouting. George glared at him. Then find it fast, monsieur. Before they hang me for the wrong reason. Poirot looked into the young man's blazing eyes and nodded. Courage, mon garçon. The innocent must always appear guilty first. It is the law of drama. That evening, Poirot and Reeves convened in the parlour of the Admiral's Arms. The landlord kept his distance, though his ears strained to hear. We have too much, Reeves complained. Too many stories. It's a fog. Poirot shook his head gently. Not a fog, Inspector. A painting. The murderer has brushed the canvas with many strokes of red to draw the eye away. It is for us to see the shape beneath. He opened his notebook, where neat lines of handwriting marched in order. Consider. First red herring, the knife of George Holt. Planted or dropped, but in either case, innocent. Second, the shadow seen by Mrs. Peebles. Third, the murmurs heard by Mr. Pargeter. Each is designed to make us look at the young and the quarrelsome. But the crime itself, it is too tidy. Too neat. Weaver trusted the hand that stilled him. He laughed, Clara Bell says, at a voice soft and low. That is not the voice of anger. That is the voice of calculation. Reeves rubbed his temples. Then who? Poirot did not answer at once. He rose and walked to the window. Across the square, the banyan loomed, black against the reddening sky. The cottage with the green shutters sat in its shadow, curtains drawn once more. Poirot's gaze lingered there, and his eyes grew sharp. The widow Ashcombe, Reeves said slowly. You've suspected her from the start. Poirot turned back, his smile courteous but thin. I suspect all, Inspector. But Madame Ashcombe, she polishes, she tidies, she arranges. An hour scene beneath the banyan, it was arranged. Too carefully. A jug laid down, a glass placed upright, a body propped like a doll. Such things do not spring from passion. They spring from habit. Reeves sat heavily. But we've nothing to prove it. Not yet, Poirot said. But the little grey cells are patient. Tomorrow we will look again at her shed of ropes. We will see what length is missing, and where it has gone. And we will ask who benefits from Weaver's silence. That is always the final key. As night fell, Poirot took one last walk beneath the banyan. The villagers had gone indoors, the square was hushed, and the air at last held a whisper of coolness. He stood where Weaver's body had been found, looking up through the heavy branches. A red herring, mon pauvre, he murmured to the absent man. You made a theatre of your death. You tried to look drunk, careless, at ease. But in so doing, you gave the truth to anyone who observes. You were killed not by rage, but by tidiness. The tree said nothing, only swayed a little, as though in agreement. Poirot turned and walked back towards the inn, his small figure precise against the vast, dark village. The false clues had been cast, but he, Hercule Poirot, would not be distracted. He already sensed the hand behind the curtain. All that remained was to draw it into the light. Chapter 7. Gathering the Suspects. By the time another day passed, Belham Green felt more like a stage than a village. Curtains twitched whenever Poirot walked the green, and whispers hurried behind him like a tide chasing a boat. The banyan tree stood silent, but its shadow seemed to stretch further, as though it enjoyed its new role as the theatre's curtain. Poirot, immaculate despite the heat, decided the hour had come to draw all the players into one room. It is time, Inspector, he told Reeves as they stood before the Admiral's arms. We have heard each voice alone, and the music is confused. Now we shall hear them together, and at last the harmony, or the discord, will tell us the truth. Reeves looked doubtful but obeyed. By mid-afternoon, the village hall was opened, its windows thrown wide, and chairs set in 2 neat rows. Constable Finch was sent to knock on doors, summon the suspects, and seat them like an audience waiting for a performance. The assembly began with nervous shuffling. Mrs. Ashcombe sat stiffly in the front row, her gloves clasped, her eyes darting often to the banyan visible through the tall windows. Clara Bell, pale but composed, kept close to her father, the blacksmith Josiah, whose huge hands clenched his knees. George Holt leaned against the wall at the back, arms crossed, his face a scowl of defiance. Evan Rook, red-haired and broad as ever, filled a chair with stubborn silence. Mr. Pargeter the landlord came reluctantly, his ledger still tucked under one arm, as if business should not wait even for murder. Others from the village hovered in the doorway, eager for drama. Poirot entered last, stepping with his usual unhurried grace. He bowed to them all, adjusted the crease of his trousers, and took his place at the centre of the room. Inspector Reeves loomed behind him, notebook ready, but said nothing. Poirot spread his hands, palms out, as though opening the performance. My friends, he began, I thank you for your patience. You are weary of questions, weary of suspicion, weary of heat. But we must finish our story. A man lies dead beneath your banyan tree, and though he was not beloved, still he was a man, and he has the right to the truth. A murmur passed through the room. Poirot raised one finger, silencing it. We shall consider only facts. Fact 1. Thomas Weaver was a man who lived on deceit. He sold false goods, lent money at cruel interest, and held over you all the shadow of shame. Fact 2. He wrote a letter promising exposure unless payment came by midnight. Fact 3. At midnight, he was dead. Fact 4. His body was arranged, tidied, if you please, with a jug, a glass, and a posture that suggested accident. Who among you has both the motive and the temperament for such a crime? His eyes swept the room, pausing on each face in turn. No one answered. Poirot inclined his head. Let us test the possibilities. Monsieur Holt. George straightened, his glare fierce. Yes, you'll point to me first. Everyone does. I argued with him, I threatened him. I told him he'd answer for cheating Clara. But I didn't lay hands on him. Poirot nodded gently. Indeed, you threatened. You are young, hot-blooded. But your violence is fire, brief, consuming, uncontrolled. Our crime was no blaze of temper. It was cool. Orderly. When I look at you, I see fists, not knots. Sit, mon garçon. For now you are free. George flushed but said nothing, though Clara sent him a quick, grateful glance. Next, Monsieur Rook, Poirot continued. You two quarrelled with Weaver. Nails that bent, money wasted. You had the size and the strength. I was home, Rook said flatly. Ask my sister. Ah yes, she heard your cough. So domestic, so ordinary. No, Monsieur Rook, you are blunt. If you killed, you would strike with a hammer, not with a cord. You would leave him broken, not carefully arranged. You two are not my murderer. Rook grunted and folded his arms. Poirot turned. Monsieur Pargeter. The landlord started. Me? I only sold him the mead. That's all. Just so. You bent your rule for him, you allowed a late order. But you are a man of profit, not of secrecy. Your ledger is your passion. You would not kill for debt, you would charge interest. I thank you, monsieur. Poirot's eyes moved to the blacksmith. Monsieur Bell, you wished vengeance for your daughter's shame. Josiah Bell's great hands tightened. I'd break him for it if he lived. But not if he died. You are honest anger, monsieur, and honest anger does not tidy its victim like a parlour. You would not smooth the scene with polish. Poirot turned then to Clara. Mademoiselle Bell, you met Weaver near midnight. You heard his threats. You smelled lavender near the tree, a scent that lingered though the night was hot. You left in tears, and you hid. That was brave, yes, but dangerous. And yet you did not kill him. You are too frightened, too young. Weaver laughed at you, he would not laugh at the one who came after. Clara whispered, who then? Poirot's gaze shifted to Mrs. Ashcombe. The widow sat rigid, her hands white around her gloves. She lifted her chin, but her breath was quick. Madam, Poirot said softly, from your window you saw the body first. You said you heard nothing, yet you recalled the clock at midnight. You keep your house in order, your ropes labelled in the shed, your brass polished. And Weaver, he threatened you also, did he not? Her lips parted. He lied about my husband's debts. He said he would tell the parish. I told him I had nothing to fear. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low, compelling. Yet you feared. You barred your shutters, but your conscience pricked. You waited, you watched, you went out. You took a cord, smooth, strong, not the rough bell rope, and you met him under the banyan. You spoke softly, so he trusted you. You pressed the cord, just once, firmly. He did not fight. Then, madam, you tidied. You laid the jug, you placed the glass, you made it look like heat and drink. Order from chaos, your habit, your talent. A gasp rippled through the hall. Reeves leaned forward, ready to seize her? But Poirot lifted a hand. Not yet. I do not accuse without proof. The proof, madam, is in the rope missing from your shed. A short length cut, recently, its end too clean. That cord, I think, lies somewhere hidden in your house. With it, we shall prove the mark on Weaver's throat. And then, madam, the story will be finished. Mrs. Ashcombe trembled. Her handkerchief dropped to the floor. For a moment she seemed to shrink within herself. But she did not confess. She only sat, silent, staring at the banyan shadow across the hall floor. Poirot turned to the others. "You see, Miss Amidst? The murderer hides among you, not in the hot blood of youth nor the blunt strength of the quarry, but in the careful hands of order. Remember this, evil may dress itself in neatness as well as in rage." The hall was utterly silent. Poirot drew his pocket watch, snapped it open, and nodded. "Tomorrow, Inspector, we shall fetch the rope. And then, with the evidence in our hands, we will close the curtain." The villagers filed out, murmuring, glancing back at the widow who sat frozen in her chair. George Holt was the first to leave, dragging Clara with him. Rook stomped away without a word. Pargeter shook his head, muttering about scandal. Reeves bent close to Poirot as the doors closed. "Have you truly got her?" he whispered. Poirot smiled, his moustache gleaming. "We have almost got her, my friend. But the little grey cells tell me there may yet be one last twist before the truth is whole." He placed his watch back into his pocket and looked once more at the banyan, dark and patient outside. Midnight had spoken, but the final revelation waited. Chapter 8: The Little Grey Cell's Triumph. The following morning dawned with a merciful hint of breeze, though the sun still pressed heavy upon Belham Green. The banyan tree stood unmoved, its leaves whispering secrets only Poirot could seem to hear. He rose from the Admiral's arms with polished shoes and a gleaming moustache, declaring to Inspector Reeves, "Today, mon ami, we complete the picture. The curtain shall fall, and the players shall know their parts." Reeves, weary but resolute, gathered Constable Finch. Together they set out for Mrs. Ashcombe's cottage, Poirot walking at the centre like a maestro approaching his orchestra. The widow answered their knock with her usual strained composure. She wore the same dark dress, gloves drawn tight despite the heat. The parlour was tidy as ever, polished surfaces winking beneath the morning sun. "Madam," Poirot said with his soft courtesy, "it is not accusation that brings us here, but truth. You recall the shed? We must look there again." Her lips pressed thin. "If you must." She led them reluctantly. Inside the shed, the coils of rope hung in neat order, each labelled, "Washing, Parcels, Garden, Spare." The peg-marked spare still hung empty. Poirot raised his brows delicately. "You see, Inspector. The absent speaks. It is like a chair at table when all are seated, at once the eye notices it." Mrs. Ashcombe protested faintly. "A length may have been taken months ago." "I cannot recall." Poirot stepped closer. "But I can recall for you, madam. The cut was recent, clean, white fibres not yet smudged by dust. A piece of cord went missing last week. That piece, I say, now lies hidden in your house." Reeves ordered Finch to search. The constable rummaged through drawers, cupboards, trunks. At last, from beneath a stack of linen in the bedroom chest, he produced a small coil of cord, knotted once, its fibres twisted smooth. "Here, sir." Poirot took it carefully in his gloved hands. Voila! A cord narrow, strong, yet polished by handling. Dr. Whitfield will say, I am certain, that such a cord could leave the neat crescent upon a man's throat. "This, madam, is your missing rope." The widow gasped, her hand rising to her mouth. But still she did not confess. She sank into a chair, her shoulders trembling, her eyes fixed on some far corner where she seemed to plead silently with her absent husband. Poirot set the cord aside with care. "It is enough. But still, there is more. Come, Inspector, we must gather the village once more." By noon, the hall was filled again. The same faces, tense and pale, Clara with her father, George Holt glowering, Rook grim and silent, Pargeter fidgeting with his ledger. Mrs. Ashcombe sat apart, head bowed, gloves still clasped. Poirot took his place at the centre. The air was heavy with expectation. Even the flies seemed to pause in their flight. "My friends," he began, "yesterday I spoke of arrangement. Today I give you certainty. Thomas Weaver was murdered not in rage, but in order. He was blackmailing one of you. He wrote a letter demanding money by midnight. At midnight, he was silenced. He held up the coil of cord. With this, a piece cut from Madame Ashcombe's shed. Smooth enough to leave a mark neat and decisive. Weaver trusted the one who held it. He did not fight. Why? Because it was not a stranger, not a hot-blooded youth, not a quarrelsome neighbour. It was the widow herself. The hall gasped. Mrs. Ashcombe closed her eyes. Poirot continued, his voice steady. She feared exposure. Weaver threatened to reveal debt said to be left by her late husband. A lie, perhaps, but lies are powerful when one's reputation is fragile. She lured him under the tree with promise of payment. She brought her cord. She spoke softly, he laughed, and she tightened. Then she arranged the scene, the jug laid carefully, the glass upright, the body posed as if overcome by heat and drink. It was the work of a woman accustomed to tidiness, to order, to neatness. Reeves stepped forward. "You hear it, Martha Ashcombe. You'd best confess now." But Poirot lifted a finger. "Attend, Inspector. For though all points here, there is yet one last twist." The room held its breath. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Yes, Madame Ashcombe arranged the scene. Yes, she hid the rope. But if he let the silence draw, savouring the drama. She did not kill him. The widow's eyes flew open, astonished. Clara gasped aloud. Reeves sputtered. "Not kill him?" "But—" Poirot raised his hand. "Patience. Consider." Weaver was silenced with a single, swift pressure. No struggle. No fight. He was surprised. A strong man might do it, yes, but a strong man does not arrange. A tidy woman might arrange, yes, but she would not possess the strength to subdue so quickly. What, then? Two people. He turned slowly. One to silence, one to arrange. And which two? His eye settled on Josiah Bell. The blacksmith stiffened. "I've told you I'd break him if I could, but I didn't." "You did," Poirot said gently. "You met him after your daughter fled. You seized him with hands used to iron, pressed the cord. In seconds, Weaver was gone. But then came the widow. She found you, perhaps by accident, perhaps because she too had meant to go. And together you made a bargain. She would arrange the body, polish the scene, hide the rope, for her reputation's sake, for your daughter's sake. And you would say nothing." He bowed his head. The hall was silent again, save for the distant chime of the church clock striking the half-hour. Poirot lifted his eyes once more, his moustache immaculate, his voice quiet but firm. "And so, Miss Amos, the case of the banyan tree is closed. Justice will have its way. But remember, murder does not always come from hatred alone. Sometimes, it is born of love untidy, of fear misplaced, of debts that should never have been written." He turned, he stepped precise, and walked into the sunlight, leaving behind the villagers of Belham Green to whisper their astonishment beneath the unyielding shadow of the banyan.